In today's recap manhwa, it was way better to keep searching right now. All the young ones and the Garnet beast heard a noise in the woods and a loud scream. Barely human, it seemed to rip the silence of the night apart. The blonde dashed forward, adrenaline fueling her to move as fast as she could while the massive predator chased her, slowing down bit by bit, even bracing to fall. The princess was sure she couldn't run anymore and her strength was running out. Suddenly, North almost bumped into her little beast, who shouted happily that they'd finally found their master. She wanted to ask where it came from, but the magical creature suddenly leaned forward right at the predator. Garnet raised her hand scared and yelled, trying to tell her pet it had to back off or else they'd straight up get eaten, but Pika stretched two tiny paws toward the monster's face and the whole area suddenly filled with a bright, blinding white light. The monster didn't realize at first it couldn't see a thing and whimpered scared, stepping back several paces, trying to blink, barely opening its eyes and covering them with its palms. The blonde girl was shocked to realize the little creature had used its magic to win and forgot this animal. According to the original game plot, had light magic it skillfully used to help the characters. Looking at the furry predator who seemed a bit out of it, Garnet knew it was better for them to bail. Before it came to Pika lit the way, and the girl with new strength from the sudden rescue followed to get to safety. After a while, North started breathing heavy, clutching her side, thinking she'd soon drop straight to the ground, totally drained. Soon she finally saw Iris, Nellum, and Lillian, who suggested she get out of the dark forest and back to the safe house ASAP. Garnet looked at them surprised but couldn't help smiling, and blushed hard, feeling someone's worry even though she thought no one would notice her disappearance. The blonde girl gasped and said she and Pika might be chased by a huge evil monster, so they had to get out of there fast. The girl was trying to calm down when suddenly she heard a loud, even angrier roar of a massive predator behind her. Iris's flame flared up in her palm as the young guy with a cheerful grin said it had been a minute since he fought. Beast that big, Nellum agreed. Lillian gently pushed Garnet behind her back, shielding her with her body, and calmly asked if her little brother could handle it alone. The dark-haired guy nodded. Swinging, the guy ordered his brother and the butler to watch over the princess, adding he could solo this monster. It seemed Iris's magic was so ridiculously strong it shook not just the whole broadleaf forest, but also the surrounding areas. Hearing the roar, Kiri, who was resting after a long hike and recovering in the water, turned around and looked out the panoramic window. Astray was talking business with his company. He turned toward the sound and explosion light, immediately muttering and wondering what the hell went down there. As a result, the terrible monster was defeated. No cap. It fell into the hands of the main love interest of the protagonist, who now was Garnet. By the way, the girl still joined the fight at the guy's request and beat the almost dead monster, even though she was super scared herself. Nellum said it was a sick hit, and the blonde woman chuckled quietly at the awkwardness, saying she didn't expect that from herself. Iris sparked a fire in her palms, saying they shouldn't stress because she remembered the way back, and Lillian objected that they use magic and walk like all the monster's palms. Garnet got scared, hearing from her older friend that monsters might attack again if they suddenly detected someone else's energy when the downpour started. The blondie remembered when they went to find Lady Garnet, there was a small house at the foot of the mountain, the heir to the throne. Thought they wouldn't have to get soaked to the bone and walk in the dark half the night around all the possible monsters. A few hours later, the teens finally rolled up to their little safe house and rushed inside as a squad. Since they were already soaked, North, drenched, exhaled chill and pressed her hand against her chest, declaring they were finally safe. Looking out the window and touching it with her palm, Nellum said the rain wasn't even thinking about stopping, so it was better for them to just wait it out here all night. Iris looked around and immediately asked how 4 people were supposed to sleep here, when there was only one bed in the whole house. Lillian, barely touching her, hugged the girl and said that in this case, they'd have to crash with the lover in the same bed. Taking the girl's hand and squeezing her wrist, Iris said her brother couldn't just steal Garnet and the bed along with her. Suddenly, Pika confidently announced she'd be spending the night with the lover, and all the guys would temporarily live and set up shop on the second floor. Everyone, including the annoyed Iris and the princess, who was completely blushing, turned surprised toward the magical creature. After a while, the girl was left alone and hung her clothes on the lines, hoping morning would come ASAP. She thought Rose was probably worried about them, and then she heard a weird sound and turned, feeling something cold in her hand. The guys, who had already settled into their beds upstairs, jumped up because they heard Garnet's loud scream coming from downstairs, competing with each other, asking what happened and if the girl was hurt. The 3 buddies rushed down the stairs, skipping steps. Sitting on the floor in her underwear, the blonde was trembling with fear and pointed at the little metal slime, explaining it popped out of nowhere and scared her. Nellum was already gearing up to fight and pulled out a knife. Eris muttered that it was just a common little monster and stepped forward, saying he'd handle it. Covering Garnet with a white blanket, Lillian carefully said it'd be better if she stayed covered or she might catch a cold unintentionally. At the same time, the dark-haired guy dealt with all the slimes with the help of the heir's butler, who easily wielded swords. A few hours later, the rain stopped, morning came, and the bright, blinding sun was already shining over the forestry school residence. Rose woke up, sat on the bed, and looking around the bedroom, thought Garnet hadn't come back after leaving. A woman with dark hair tied up in a strict bun and thin glasses silently looked toward the bedroom and also thought North hadn't returned. She heard that the king's heir had caused a lot of trouble before and everyone around her needed to be extra careful. Although the students said the princess started behaving better, the teacher found out from Datura that Garnet had sneaked out for fun at night with a group of guys. When the friendly group returned to the forest, after the night's adventures, the blonde muttered that they finally made it back. North hadn't slept enough, and today just wanted to lie down and do nothing because last night was a complete disaster where they didn't rest at all. When they met, Rose said with a bright smile that she was super worried about her friend and was insanely happy about her return. The girl muttered that a lot had happened there, and they planned to discuss the situation among themselves, but the blonde was called by name by the same strict teacher who already knew everything walking toward them. The woman said Garnet had finally decided to come back and didn't look friendly at all. As she walked toward them, the dark-haired girl said she'd been listening closely to where the princess was all night, what she was doing, and why she didn't spend the night in the dorm. She said she was attacked by a first-year girl's magic and then had to rush off into the forest, where the heir got lost. North declared excitedly that during that night she managed to run into a huge monster, got caught in a heavy downpour, and finally found a house at the foot of the mountain where she spent the night. The teacher, who was nearby, lost it and, waving her hand hard, slapped her student on the cheek. The dark-haired woman said sternly she didn't need excuses, which were obviously just plain lies. Garnet touched her cheek and added that those people weren't worthy of studying at the academy and that she personally would take care of their expulsion. An insanely happy Datura popped up behind the teacher, her voice dripping with sarcasm and shade. She apologized to Mrs. North, who confidently said she was just super worried about the princess, who straight up vanished with 3 kids under the cover of darkness. The teacher claimed that, unlike Garnet, Datura was a good girl who always asked for advice from her elders and never lied to anyone. The woman added that as proof the other students could back up what West said was true. Suddenly, someone from the company lifted their head and, despite the fear and trembling in their voice, said that actually it wasn't all like that. Datura glared at her and angrily asked what she was whispering about, questioning if she was serious, like she just lied to her teacher. Raising her hands in a peace sign and turning pale with fear, the girl nervously declared that she hadn't said or meant anything like that. The dark-haired woman crossed her arms over her chest and said that in this case, nothing bad had happened. Garnet frowned and realized West also knew the events of the series, like a reborn, and probably set it all up. Suddenly, Nellum appeared in front of her, who confidently declared that her lover wasn't lying and was actually scared of all these girls, so she ran off to the woods. The blonde was determined and ready to make sure no one dirtied the name of his savior, for something she never did. The teacher said the young man was the princess's personal butler, whose duties included protection, so the young man couldn't be trusted. The North heir realized they'd conspired, because throughout the whole conversation the teacher treated only Datura with respect and boldly called her by name. In the game, West had tons of minions making life hell for the main character, but using friendship with the teacher was next level low. The original story had a similar situation with these characters, and West made sure all the attacks now landed on her. The dark-haired girl said that in her academy origin didn't matter, and the law was just words from teachers and professors. Garnet thought irritably that it was easy for the girl to talk since she was just pushing this woman around, using her connections. When Datura asked how the princess planned to avoid expulsion, Rose and Nilam expressed their wish to protect their friend from this. The blonde nervously squeezed the wrist of her other hand with her fingers, wondering if she would be willing to accept such a harsh punishment for something she didn't do. West laughed loud and open, saying ending her school life like this, which had barely started, was super pathetic. She added it was impossible to keep those people on their side and advised the teacher to quickly send a decree about her expulsion to the administration. The woman adjusted her glasses, confirmed that was the case, and asked not to worry, adding she'd definitely handle it. But suddenly, a trio of men appeared who hadn't been there before, one crossing his arms over his chest and asking what was going on here. The teacher said she was just having an educational conversation with a disobedient student who broke the rules and nothing more. Garnet listened quietly, while the woman said she went to the woods with the kids at night, probably to do something shady. A man said this story was different from the report they got, and his colleague replied that the surveillance footage showed something else. Datura and the teacher froze in shock and even fear when they learned about the recording devices. The stranger added they constantly upgrade the security system, and that's why they equipped the whole forest camp with special cameras. The blonde dude said they forgot to check yesterday's footage, but the students reminded them about this important detail. The guy was talking about Lillian and Iris nearby, who definitely wouldn't disrespect Mrs. Garnet North. She looked at her saviors with pure delight, because without their help there's no way she could have avoided that much embarrassment and getting kicked out of the academy. A majestic man with glasses confidently declared he personally checked all the records, and they could trust the facts mentioned. He was the principal, someone you could always trust, so the woman froze in surprise, thinking he was joking. Garnet looked down to hide her obvious excitement and silently wondered if Iris and Lillian, in today's recap manhwa, she might have told the guy the whole truth. Lillian immediately said she asked the boss to check everything related to the words said earlier about the accusations against the princess. The man, of course, puffed up with pride when his student added that without such an amazing teacher they wouldn't have been able to solve such a complex case. He added that the camera footage showed how this student was attacked by other girls using their magic, and Garnet ran away scared. Lillian and Iris smiled happily when the boss said anyone would have dipped in that situation. The man added that you can't call yourself a teacher. After unfairly condemning a student and listening to the crowd, the dark-haired girl lowered her head because she had absolutely nothing to argue against such eye-opening facts. She said that in this case, she'd gather the rest of the students for roll call and ask them to ask about her. She turned and left. Datura swallowed nervously and looked at the teacher, realizing that in this situation, she had no one else to lean on but the woman left blushing with anger all the way to her ears. The dark-haired woman followed her, and a group of girls who were part of her crew followed too. Garnet exhaled loudly and relaxed, clutching the clasp of her uniform tracksuit and thinking that to her surprise she was saved. The boss said the conflict was resolved, and Lillian turned around, thanking him with a smile for his help in the matter. Soon all the teachers and other students left, leaving Garnet alone with her now familiar squad of friends, all with bright, respectful smiles. The blonde thanked her crew for their actions that let her dodge punishment. The oldest brother smiled, nodded, rubbed his chin with his fingers and said no thanks were needed. He added that thanks to Nellum, they located the necessary camera and got footage proving Mrs. North's innocence. Garnet turned to look at her personal butler and realized she expected nothing less from this small, quick assistant who was devoted to her. Lillian added that he, her younger brother, and Pi managed to convince the teachers to watch the necessary camera footage before any procedure. Giving a thumbs up in approval, the dark-haired guy with a confident smile declared that it was all bullshit, and that they'd help her anyway. The girl blushed hard, clenching her hands because she couldn't express all the gratitude she felt toward all these people who cared about her. Datura and the teacher discussed what had happened in the back hallway, insulting the northern princess and thinking about what to do next. Only they didn't know that at that moment, around the corner, every word was overheard by the heir of Lord Demon Astra. A bit later, the main events of the plot moved to the spacious Demon King's castle lit by bright sunlight in the main hall. The servant informed his master that a report from Lord Astra himself had arrived this morning, the ruler's son. Hearing all this, the king agreed with the heir's doubts about whether Princess Datura would be a worthy demon queen because there were too many rumors. What made Lady Vez stand out from other candidates for the future ruler's wife was precisely the fact that she skillfully handled her magic. He murmured that if we talk about other options, the Eastern King recently adopted a girl who has light magic and is very supportive of others. The servant confirmed the king's words, and added that according to rumors, this girl was the only one who possessed rare light magic. The red-haired monarch rubbed his chin with his fingers, listening carefully to his subordinate, and murmured in response that this was very interesting. Listening closely to his subordinate, he murmured back that this was pretty interesting. The ruler leaned back on his throne, noticing the thoughtful look on the prime minister's face. Asking what was up, the man didn't answer right away because he was thinking about another possible option, one that could link Astra's fate. He said if he were king, he'd pick little Garnet North, who's changed a lot now, as a wife for his firstborn heir. After that nomination, there was total silence in the main hall, which was awkward. The prime minister murmured that Lady Datura's position hadn't been questioned until that moment, and that Lady Garnet would become queen of the Northern Kingdom after graduating. He added quietly that if he could choose a candidate for the future ruler of the state and Astra's wife, then his eyes would be on Garnet. The man said that although her magic wasn't that strong, she won the magic tournament and became the favorite of the townspeople and the family. The Demon King paused thoughtfully, then twirled a strand of red hair with his fingers and said that in that case they could check her out later, walking through the academy halls. North walked calmly, adjusting her uniform, then stopped and sneezed loudly. Covering her face with her hands, Nellum, who immediately appeared nearby, asked if she was okay. Since a couple of days ago they got caught in the rain and the lady might have gotten sick and caught a cold. Clenching his fist, the blonde said that if those damn bastards hadn't scared the princess, this wouldn't have happened and they wouldn't dare act so arrogantly. Like basically, he pulled a dagger from the inside pocket of his jacket. Nellum asked if it would be easier to just take them all out by grabbing the long tails of his jacket. The girl screamed desperately that from now on he wasn't a hitman, but her butler, so there was no need to act like that anymore in the office. Garnet saw her little pet in Iris's hands, who was tickling it while Pi squealed that the young man had already tortured the poor creature. Looking at them with a soft smile, the blonde thought the two seemed to get along well. Right at that moment, the teacher entered the spacious room, which meant another long lesson was starting right now. Standing in front of his desk with papers in hand, the man announced that next week students would have exams in all subjects. When he added that for diligent students it would be easy, but everyone else would have to try. Garnet thought he had totally forgotten about that. Later, walking through the academy courtyard, she mentioned this to Rosa, who hurried to assure her friend that everything would be fine. The green-eyed girl said calmly they had to stay chill because the tests were pure nonsense, and their existence hadn't even been proven yet. North only realized it was a joke when her friend laughed happily. Keeping a positive attitude studying the game was just as important as the relationship between characters, because it determined interaction levels with the parents. There were 2 weeks of tests at the academy throughout the semester, and all the main game characters, of course, were excellent students. This test week showed that Garnet didn't like studying, so she took the teacher's comment about preparation personally. The blonde girl was seriously thinking that if she didn't pay proper attention to her grades, she could be on the verge of expulsion. She decided to handle the situation differently and asked Rosa if she'd like to prepare together for all these tests, and she happily agreed. Looking into her green eyes, Garnet thought excitedly that if she dragged her friend into her abyss of ignorance, they'd both fail the tests. Suddenly, she apologized to Rosa, surprising her with that behavior, then turned and headed in the opposite direction. North quickly explained she needed to study in the library today, and then left fast so her friend wouldn't follow. In the library, where the girl really came to prepare diligently, Lillian found her on the way and picked a book to read. Looking the blonde over carefully, the young man asked if Lady Garnet had decided to seriously prepare for the tests. The heiress smiled, happily glad to meet a familiar guy, and asked if he was here for the same reason. The guy replied condescendingly that he wasn't worried about academic exams, because the powers of the director of one of the institutes included way more complex stuff. Lillian suddenly grabbed the girl's wrist, pressed it against his body with his fingers, and then asked if he could help the princess with her Garnet prep. She blushed so hard she looked like a tomato and screamed in surprise, totally breaking the library vibe. A bit later, the guy praised the princess for how fast she soaked up info, but North couldn't get why they had to sit so close. Lillian smiled and suggested solving some problems to lock down the material, and the girl looked at her shocked. After tackling some tasks, the guy moved his hand with a pen, a fountain pen, sliding it across the notebook page while humming something low-key. He quickly spotted the mistakes, big and small, scattered through the princess's text. Gracefully running his fingers over the paper, reading her notes, Garnet thought if Lillian herself checked everything, she'd catch every single note about errors and inaccuracies, suddenly realizing she hadn't seen or heard Pi, who was always nearby. For a long time, the blonde girl looked up, but the critter wasn't close. Pi was chilling, flying through the library, between the tall, long shelves, until someone decided to grab him. Pi screamed when a strong hand and stubborn fingers grabbed his fur and yanked him down, leaving a trail of white feathers behind that had fallen during the scuffle. Later, after locking the magical creature in a cage, Datura, with a sly, bright smile, declared she'd finally caught the scared little animal, who shrank back, terrified, sensing obvious danger, and squeaked, pressing his soft paws over his mouth. Reaching out to him, the dark-haired woman said Pi was the main character's top assistant. To complete the game, West thought Garnet broke the game's pattern because the original plot's goal was to build a relationship with a specific character. It was also possible to form a harem, but for that the player just didn't develop a romantic bond with any character, instead just pulling heroes to their side as allies. Datura thought if she could win over all the key characters, North would be useless to anyone, and she could snatch everything he had. The little critter heard such nasty, rude stuff about his master and himself, trembling with fear about what awaited him. The dark-haired girl said she knew very well that Cutie P was a secret character in the original game, not just a familiar. She shook the cage and ordered the creature to reveal its true powers, showing what the main characters really felt about her. The girl, with a wicked look, promised the animal that if Pi did what she said right now, he'd be free. At the game's start, the character's interest level was 50, but to fall in love, it needed to be double. Datura was sure she and Astro had that. Realizing she didn't have many options now, the magical beast agreed and used its true power, showing affection levels. With Astro, Lillian, and Iris it was 20, with Kirilla half that, and with the now hated Nellum it went fully negative. The dark-haired woman immediately yelled loud and angry, not getting how a negative relationship level could even exist. She couldn't understand why her bond with the Demon Lord's heir stayed so low, even though the girl tried to spend all her time with him. The princess grabbed the cage where Pi sat and shook the poor animal loudly, yelling that this had to be some global glitch and he better not be lying to her. Astro, passing through the courtyard and hearing the noise and shouting, came over and asked what Datura was doing here. The black-haired girl turned and blushed, putting the cage away again while the baby inside recovered from the shake. The redhead approached the girl and said sternly that Garnet lost her pet in the library, then asked if she'd stolen it. When Datura said she hadn't, the heir said the theft alone wasn't enough for the girl. She also decided to lie, adding she didn't even want to hear those excuses, and as it seemed before, she wasn't cut out to be the future demon queen. When Astro returned the pet to Garnet, she squealed happily, welcoming him, and opened her arms to hug him as he flew toward her, curled up next to his babe. Pi, with a cheerful smile, declared that the redhead dude had saved him, and North looked at him shocked. Grabbing the baby and stroking his soft fur with her palms, the princess said they had already searched for the baby, and they were super scared, no time to think about anything. The blonde woman took several quick steps toward Astra. In today's recap manhwa, and with a smile thanked him for saving her, the young guy suddenly stepped away from the wall, grabbed the girl's hand, and said with a shaky voice that he was down to do whatever it took for her. Pei looked confused by the heir's moves, and Garnet blushed, a bit thinking the dude was really kind to her. Lillian, watching all this from the side, frowned a little, and thought she needed to have a talk with the future ruler later, when Astrid was already walking down the hall with a smile and hands in her pockets when she heard someone shout her name from behind. The second-year student, leaning against the wall, crossed his arms over his chest, shook his head, and said His Majesty was super annoying. Lillian wondered if that behavior was too rude and trashy for a guy who already had a fiancé. The redhead looked up, clearly way too unsatisfied with the convo that had started. Because it was a personal matter, a few days later, the morning before the exam, the whole academy was on edge, and the students were gossiping that Lord Astre had broken his engagement with Lady Datura, even wrote about it in the local school paper. And the girls whispered that the handsome redhead would start looking for a new girl. Hearing all this, Garnet looked up from her breakfast, surprised, unable to hide how much it affected her. The girl lowered her head, because she knew there was no plot twist like that in the game, and West stayed Astra's girl till the end of the original game. Rose said, awkwardly that she even kinda regretted Astra and Datura breaking up, and the blonde woman quietly replied that that was how it was later. The girl heard a phone call and looked surprised because nobody had called her in a long time, and all her friends stayed close on the other end of the phone was her dad's voice saying they needed to talk about something super important. Immediately asking if she knew about the engagement being called off holding the phone. The girl said this terrible event shook the whole academy, but she had absolutely nothing to do with it. The man said they'd talk about something else, then said Rose and her daughter were nominated as candidates for the Princess Bride role. Surprisingly, pulling the phone away from her face, the blonde woman couldn't hold back a scream because she didn't get how she was connected to all this. Her dad explained her nomination seemed to be proposed by the Prime Minister, who was still impressed by the princess's behavior when the king added he just warned him about the possibility of this outcome. Garnet snatched the phone away from her face and froze in fear. She looked at Peaceful Pie sleeping and thought she wished she could rest that peacefully too. And a ton of problems dropped on her head. All the students non-stop competed to spill the latest tea, and there was a real noisy swarm in the office. Garnet was shocked realizing her friend sitting across from her clearly wasn't too happy and just sighed quietly in frustration. The girl's green eyes burned with emotion as she turned around and started whispering something totally unrelated to the drama. In the end, Rose revealed they were chosen as the new candidates for Astra's bride, and added she was super nervous about it, remembering her dad's words. The blonde exhaled loudly and thought she understood her now close friend like no one else, clasping her hands. Garnet said she felt exactly the same way, and then said Astra probably wasn't too happy about what was going down. Rose nodded as North added they should now just focus on the exam because if they get kicked out, it'd be even more problems. Almost right after he said that, the office door swung open and the teacher stepped into the classroom, grabbing the papers needed for the exam as she looked at the tasks ahead. The girl clearly realized that now she had to focus solely on her studies. Lillian. She trained her well to ace the academic exam, so the blonde woman gripped her pen tight and got to work. A couple of days later, the results for all the students were posted on a special board. Located in the biggest classroom of the academy, Garnet stood among a crowd of classmates next to Rose, searching anxiously for her name among the sea of last names. Suddenly she saw she was on the list of top-scoring students. She screamed with joy, mentally thanking Lillian for the help. On the other side of the same board, Datura was standing and also searching for her last name to check her grades. Her yellow eyes flared with rage, and she clenched her teeth when she saw she was ranked 5th on the overall student list recently. Astri approached her in the academy courtyard and calmly announced that her engagement was officially over. The dark-haired woman screamed and asked why. The heir to the throne exhaled irritably and asked why she had to explain anything, reminding her of how she'd been acting lately. Wes not only seemed annoyed, but felt like her whole life, which she'd recently promised would be successful, was crumbling right before her eyes. In the Southern Kingdom, she destroyed Prince Kirilla's restaurant, and at the entrance ceremony she tried to attack a student. She destroyed the door with her magic and more. The dark-haired woman tried to justify herself, saying it was all a misunderstanding, and that she was perfect for the role of future queen. Astra said that despite all her magical power, no one can just turn a blind eye to the reckless things she does without thinking about her status. Datura froze when she heard that the Lord's family didn't want to get involved with someone as scandalous and unworthy as her. Now, after getting terrible grades, the girl was thinking about how she'd even gotten to this point. Because none of these events existed in the original game, the princess didn't understand if the main protagonist, Rose, or her also reincarnated friend Garnet, were to blame for her awful relationship with the heir to the throne. The only thing she was sure of was that if she got rid of both girls, she'd still be the best candidate for the role of Demon Queen. Then Astra would have no choice but to come back to her and enter the same desired engagement again, and the plan would succeed. Only if things played out this way could Datura move toward a better ending that included the existence of an Aren. Back in the office, the dark-haired woman was thinking the problem wasn't just with the Demon Lord's heir. Her relationships with all the male characters left a lot to be desired. After a certain number of days, all the students gathered in a huge stadium for the next academic event, the final event of the first semester. Like in the original game, it was a sports festival attended by all the heroes with representatives from each kingdom. For example, Garnet, Lillian, Iris, and Nellum were on the Northern States team. The blonde girl was determined, because if they won, the whole team would share a certain amount of points. And she could level up her magic this time. Unlike the plot, Rose decided to just be present in the stadium and cheer on the other teams supporting them. They had 3 very powerful mages on their team, and it looked like a combo destined to win. But there was something she wasn't too sure about. Iris, who was sitting nearby, clearly noticed Garnet's twitchy movements, who alternated between smoothing her hair, biting the inside of her cheek, or touching her face with her hands. The young guy couldn't resist and asked the princess if she was nervous, and she blushed a bit. She looked up and nodded. The dark-haired guy smiled and assured the girl she didn't need to worry, because she and her older brother would work hard to win. However, this student sports festival felt way more like a regular fight than a competition with verified rules. The princess swallowed, thinking that besides magic, her magical skills could also come in handy here, but she wasn't sure if she could handle it. The announcer suddenly snapped her out of her thoughts and announced that the next event would be a relay race, then asked all the participants to gather. Garnet hoped these top athletes wouldn't join the relay, so she tried to chill out at least a little. Rose came up to her right away and smiled, saying they'd both be running in the relay, and offered to give it their all. Meanwhile, Datura stayed back a bit and prepped. the girls in her crew for another dirty trick. After a while, the women's relay started, and the first runners took off. After the start was called, Garnet and Rose stood side by side, and the blonde tried to calm down even though her whole body was shaking inside, making her want to bolt. Taking the baton to keep the relay going, North knew she'd have to grind hard to win. The girls ran from spot to spot and everyone around them was ready to throw down as hard as possible for a shot at victory. Suddenly one of the girls standing by summoned curls of her bright green magic. Garnet realized Rose would soon be hit with harmful wind energy from someone else launched by Datura's minions. She didn't have time to think, so to save her friend, the blonde jerked aside and slammed her down with all her strength. Shocked, Rose hit the ground and dropped her staff, and that was game over for her in this race today. Garnet, now exposed, found herself right in the eye of the wind magic, meant to stop her from winning the race, and it ended before anyone could even get tipsy. Everyone around immediately rushed to the northern princess, who had passed out from the attack. The blonde definitely couldn't worry about winning the festival now because she ended up in first aid, in the infirmary, regaining consciousness on a clean, soft bed, quietly wrapped in special bandages, with wraps on her face and other parts of her body. Waking up, Garnet slowly sat up, saw the cast on her leg, and thought she'd had a rough time. And that sneaky attack was super cruel. The blonde heard a familiar voice behind the white curtain. Then Kiri came in, smiling, and said the princess had finally woken up. She quickly pulled the blanket up to her neck and asked, surprised, what he was doing there, wondering if he'd also been hit by magic. He explained that sports festivals are brutal for mermaids because the stadium is way too dry, and after all that, they need time to recover. Kiria crossed her arms and muttered she wished it would rain during the sports festival, but Garnet muttered back that would be terrible. Sitting on her bed, the young man said the troublemakers at this event were girls from the Western Kingdom, but it seemed like they were forced to use magic. The blonde guy exhaled, looking at her excitedly, and asked if she thought Datura was the real culprit behind the attack. The prince said it couldn't be ruled out, because she probably hated her rival for being chosen as a candidate for the next Demon King role. Kiria added that the Eastern Kingdom's residents refused to help the West because if their princess was picked as the future queen, the state would thrive. Each kingdom tried to propose as many candidates as possible for the queen role, but in the end, the girl from the Eastern Kingdom was chosen. Kiri's aunt was picked as the past demon queen. And during the selection period, chaos was happening in all the states, but she was determined. Gripping her hand, the blonde said she wasn't interested, thinking she never planned to become queen herself. Lifting the girl's chin, the young man said the marriage proposal still stood, and he was ready to feed her local delicacies every day. Garnet involuntarily remembered the treats served at her restaurant and felt her mouth water, wanting to eat. Immediately shaking her head, North reminded herself she was the future head of her house and would become the future queen of the northern state when the girl hid wrapped in a blanket, and declared she couldn't become his wife. Karilla smiled and called the blonde funny after what happened with Garnet. The Northern Kingdom's team was filled with revenge and easily took the lead, letting all the guys' anger out in the end. Their team came out victorious in this sports festival, and even the wounded North scored points for their overall win. After a while at night, the medics finally discharged their patient from the first aid post so she could go to the safe house. Neelam, who was with her, asked how the lady was feeling, and Garnet told her not to worry, because she had rested a lot, and thanks to the potion she felt better, unfortunately. The game didn't have healing, and demons who got hurt had to heal themselves. Almost as long as humans lost in their own thoughts, the blonde girl suddenly placed the crutch in an awkward spot and dropped it, immediately falling involuntarily. To avoid leaning on her sore leg, Neelam sat on the floor and grabbed the girl so she wouldn't get hurt, pressing her against his body and exhaling. Because just like her, he was already scared, Garnet looked at her personal butler and blushed hard, because she had almost never been this close to him before. Like ever suddenly, the awkward silence between them was broken by Astray, who picked up the fallen crutch and stepped toward them, asking if the girl was hurt. Immediately stepping away from the blonde young man, North laughed nervously and assured him everything was fine, and then thanked him for his help. The redhead said that Datura keeps disappointing him. In today's recap manhwa, even after their engagement was broken since he and Rose were attacked for that very reason, thinking this line was almost exactly the same as Karilla's words, the princess said West just didn't seem able to get over it. The boy said he wanted to talk about it in that home economics class but didn't dare, and didn't have time because of what happened afterward. Looking at her, Astray said that before the engagement broke he could at least slightly influence her behavior, but now Datura was uncontrollable. Their conversation was interrupted by Iris, who greeted the girl and said she was late and that she and Lillian were already worried about the princess taking her hand. The dark-haired girl looked North up and down and noticed she was in a lot of pain, and even walking was probably really hard. Moving the crutch to one side, Iris took the princess in her arms, calmly telling her it'd be better to carry her to her room so she wouldn't be bothered. Neelam and Astray watched the scene unfolding with identical expressions, because neither of them had thought of this before. When the girl tried to object, the dark-haired man ordered her to stay still, and her personal butler ran after them with crutches. Astray exhaled, disappointed, and looked at the closed door, thinking about how fast Garnet disappeared again. Even though she'd recently been close to him, the Demon Lord's own heir was surprised by his thoughts and feelings when he realized that without this girl by his side he felt a heart-piercing melancholy, involuntarily recalling the grand loud dances and holidays they used to have. At the palace, when he was still a kid, the very young heir was denied access to them, but he often secretly listened in on the highest nobility's conversations. Because he was interested in how everything went down, a noblewoman said that according to rumors, the heir to the throne had low magic stats that had never been seen before in the royal family. The red-haired boy lowered his head disappointed when he heard from her that only lower demons use plant magic. He himself knew very well that all his royal family relatives and even his highness possessed strong earth magic. The boy clenched his fists when the cruel woman said he'd need to find a strong bride in the future. To avoid the empire's collapse, the royal garden was insanely beautiful with endless clearings, the most exotic flowers and plant statues and interesting buildings. The little angry Astre. He waved his palms over the withered flowers, trying to convince them to bloom again, mumbling softly and then yelling in frustration. Suddenly he overheard the knights talking about how the northern celestial king had a daughter who had absolutely no magical abilities. Much later everything changed, and now the heir knew how to grow giant plants. These plants could attack opponents and control them. The young man also developed the ability to control the earth to wipe the noses of all the high society ladies who loved gossip. Giving it his all in the next training session, the now mature Astre wiped the sweat from his forehead and ruffled his bright red hair. The prime minister clapped joyfully, praising the young heir, and adding that they expected nothing less from the prince. The boy with a calm face but a joyful soul listened as the man prophesied his future as one of the best rulers and the state's prosperity. The young man casually reminded him that the prime minister had come to share rumors that one of the upcoming kings would be someone without magic. He clarified if these rumors and stories were about Garnet North, who was the first and only daughter of the Northern Celestial King. The man said that was true, as thanks to her wisdom and strength she won the magical duel organized by her father. The redhead smiled and said that the fact the prime minister praised someone other than himself was very interesting and extremely rare, and yet the man turned out to be right. Although Garnet still wasn't strong in magic thanks to her perseverance, she was able to become an ideal queen. Astre thought about all this, sighing silently, and mentally concluded that he wanted to see the northern heir as his wife. The next day, Nellum said it wasn't necessary for the lady to go to school with injuries, and Iris supported this, adding that anyway, the holidays would be here soon. Smiling nervously at their concern, the blonde replied she felt fine, and would definitely manage, though she was very embarrassed by all the attention. Iris said that speaking of school, a practical exam would soon be held among the academy students to test their skills. Garnet sighed loudly and nervously muttered that she'd known about it for a long time, and was more scared of this moment than anything else. Thanks to Lillian and her support, she still managed to pass the written tests. But the practical exam tested her magical skills among other things. Passing the practical exam had a positive effect on the main character's romantic interests. North thought this was a trait of Rose because she was the only main character, but the game was changing due to interference, and it was scary to move forward not without effort. The princess thought she wasn't especially worried about love. For her it was way more important to keep friendly relations with all the characters. She needed to prepare properly for the exam because she didn't want to mess up her relationship with her father over bad grades. Later, the blonde saw that her friend Rose was also actively preparing for the upcoming magical skill level test. The deciduous forest on the outskirts of the capital, already familiar to the heir, became an excellent spot for the two friends to train, pushing their light magic to max power. Rose suggested her friend push herself to pass the exam successfully. Garnet said excitedly that it wasn't necessary to use all her magic at once, and Peach and I, surprised, supported her lover. She explained that although most monsters here were low-level, such strong magic could attract the attention of serious monsters. As soon as the blonde girl finished her last sentence, magical vines from a green plant attacked her and Rose, tightly wrapping their arms and legs. The girls looked at each other fearfully, and then noticed bright yellow eyes in the dense dark bushes. Moments later, a huge creature emerged from the thicket. Saying it wasn't necessary to use all their magic at once, Peach and I were shocked, backing up their lover. He explained that even though most monsters here are low-level, such strong magic can attract serious monsters' attention. As soon as the blonde girl finished her last sentence, magical vines from a green plant attacked her and Rose, gripping their arms and legs tight. The girls looked at each other scared, then noticed bright yellow eyes in the thick dark bushes. Moments later, a huge creature burst out of the thicket, shaped like a massive fly trap with terrifying teeth roaring as it opened its mouth. Meanwhile, Peachy was already scared, trying to figure out how to help his mistress. The blonde girl, tied up by vines, sighed loudly, knowing things were bad. This monster was the mini-boss of this spot, and the girl knew with their current magic stats, she and Rose couldn't handle it together. The monster was unimaginably huge, screaming loudly, opening its mouth and eyeing its potential victims. Against this giant floral beast, the pomegranate and the rose looked like tiny reeds that couldn't put up any fight. The blonde girl spun around, surprised to feel the familiar blazing flame energy of one of the brothers right next to her. The monster let out the deafening roar when it felt the full power of Iris's infernal fire trying to protect the girls from the attack. Rose and Garnet exhaled in relief as the strong green vine bindings loosened, freeing their arms and legs. At the same time, the vines stopped squeezing, their bodies weakened from the massive plant's attack. The freed girls dropped to the ground one after another while Pi flew overhead. Iris approached and easily dealt with the giant flytrap using her magic, then asked how they were feeling. Garnet looked up, facing the dark-haired guy, thinking he had no idea how grateful the princess was to him. The blonde girl knelt down and flashed a bright smile, thanking the young man for saving her, while Rose, sitting behind, was still recovering. Iris knelt in front of the girl and asked why they were spending time here since this forest was far from an ideal place to wander. Under Iris's stern tone, Garnet felt a bit embarrassed and explained they weren't just wandering, they were practicing for a practical exam. The guy said they got lucky this time that he was nearby because way more dangerous monsters lived in this forest than that flower. Gently taking the girl's face in his warm palms, Iris offered to accompany them during training so they wouldn't have to go through this alone. North felt her heart start pounding somewhere in her throat and muttered that she agreed, blushing hard at the guy's attitude. Thanks to the game's progress, she knew what kind of living creatures were out there, but Rose had no clue who they might run into. Still, she fearlessly used her staff and pushed the now dead monster, smiling as she checked on its petals. Looking at Iris, who was already playing with her beloved pie, the girl thought it'd be dumb not to accept her help. Now the girls could just focus on hunting and leveling up their magic energy, so they started gearing up with fresh energy. They attacked the metal slimes again and again to raise their magic levels over and over to grow stronger. Those little guys looked cute but were the biggest pests in this forest, causing non-stop trouble for everyone. They even managed to steal food from their academy's cafeteria, so Garnet didn't hesitate to destroy them with special cruelty, looking at her hands with regret. After several hours of hunting, the blonde girl annoyedly realized her magic still hadn't increased. Noticing her sad expression, Iris approached the girl and got close, asking if something else had happened. Looking at her palms with frustration, North silently wondered if she'd only ever have access to paralyzing magic her whole life. Suddenly, the dark-haired guy placed his hand on the princess's head, stroking it affectionately, and said she was still very strong. He added that the stereotypes about magic were just plain stupid. Iris said the practical exam would take place in this forest, so it didn't matter if she killed the monster or not, she'd still get credit. He explained that the idea of destroying monsters in the forest might have come from her father, the demon lord Astri, who took his duties seriously. The blonde thought that wasn't in the game, but if it was true, she could easily pass this practical exam. That same day arrived, and all the students gathered in the forest wearing sports uniforms to take the next type of test. Garnet, who had been preparing for a long time, easily overcame the required obstacles and passed the exam without any special issues. And that stereotypes about magic were just dumb. Iris added that the practical exam would take place in this forest, so it didn't matter if you killed the monster or not, you'd still get credit. She explained that the idea of killing monsters in the forest might have come from her dad, the demon lord, Astra, who took her duties seriously. The blonde thought that wasn't in the game, but if it was true, then she could easily pass this practical exam. That same day came, and all the students gathered in the forest, wearing sports uniforms to take the next type of test. Garnet, who'd been prepping for a long time, easily cleared the necessary obstacles and passed the exam with no issues. Iris watched with a calm, condescending smile as the northern princess and her friend celebrated passing the test. Astra watched the girls from the side, wondering if she'd really connect her life with one of them soon. After a while, all exams were passed, and summer break started with all students heading home, for example, to the Northern Kingdom. During the break, not much changed in Garnet's life, because the young people who became her close friends spent all their free time in her room, leaving very little time before the final boss appeared. But the game's plot had changed, so she couldn't predict how things would go. Rose worked hard prepping for exams, and with her magic stats or not, probably everything was in order. Suddenly she remembered that in the game, to check the affection levels for her favorites, the main character specifically went to Pie at night. The blonde put the little critter on her lap and asked it to show her what signs of affection Rose had with all the characters. Garnet honestly hoped that at least one main character had more respectful and real feelings for the protagonist, and quickly got up from her lover's arms to help her with this, lighting up with a bright glow as she summoned her energy. The animal showed a hologram with affection scores for the possible story favorites, which were like 90 points out of 100. North was shocked by this twist because she didn't think the stats would be almost maxed for all characters. She thought it was kinda weird since her friend barely. In today's recap manhwa, she talked to any guys outside school, but then decided everything was going according to script. Pi suddenly squealed and objected that the lady was wrong, because it was showing the love stats not for Rose but for Garnet herself. The blonde blushed hard and pointed at herself, asking how all these could be her indicators, because it was just driving her crazy. North didn't really know what to do about it, looked at her assistant then, muttered that it must be some kind of error. Pi shook its paws in denial and showed the real stats for Rose. On the hologram, which were around 60 points, the main character started with 50 points for relationships with everyone, meaning she wasn't close to anyone. Snuggling under the sheets, the girl muttered irritably that she didn't understand anything at all, then decided it'd be way better to fix it in the morning. Looking at the princess sleeping peacefully, Pi flew around the room wondering if the blonde was ready for the tests coming up in the morning. Garnet screamed loud and jumped on the bed, seeing that Iris had fallen back asleep peacefully in her bed like it was her usual thing. The dark-haired guy didn't seem to see any problem with this and snored peacefully, putting a pillow under his head. And the girl promised not to do that, turning around to stand up. North yelled surprise when she found Lillian on the other side of the bed, sitting on the floor but leaning against the mattress at some distance from it. To the princess's further confusion, Nellum was also asleep, snoring quietly, burying his face in his hands and resting on them in a sweet dream. Shaking her head, the blonde blushed hard, not knowing if she could find a logical explanation for the boy's behavior. Iris made a face at the movement and stretched, then opened her eyes a bit and muttered, something about the morning coming too fast. Looking at the bored young man yawning, Garnet covered herself with a blanket and immediately asked why everyone was sleeping in their rooms. Pa usually rested quietly in bed, curled up like a ball, and barely cared about any of the events happening. At the same time, the dark-haired guy reported that 3 assassins broke into the princess's room in the middle of the night to try another assassination attempt. At that moment, the mercenaries weren't too quiet. Enelum, with his sharp hearing, immediately heard strange sounds on the second floor and managed to call his brothers. The 3 rushed to Garnet's room and caught the assassins red-handed, hired by someone ready to take care of the sleeping girl. Iris explained she didn't wake up because of the gas. The mercenaries dropped a knockout drug in the room before they went in themselves, and naturally they immediately treated the offenders like men. They beat them until they were wiped out and told the king everything that went down. Garnet let out a heavy sigh and rubbed his chin with his fingers. Thinking about who could be behind the next hit on his life, the dark-haired guy blushed a bit and brushed away the creepy strand from his face when the girl said she was grateful for the rescue. As a result of the interrogation, it soon became clear that Datura was behind this again. She just couldn't chill and wanted to get rid of her rival ASAP. According to Iris, the old man, that is the girl's dad, immediately contacted the Eastern Celestial King and laid out his feelings real clear. The ruler of the neighboring state clearly had no clue what his daughter was up to, so he flipped when he heard about it totally out of left field. The girl found out from Iris that as punishment the princess was stripped of her title and then kicked out of the royal palace for good. The blonde girl held her breath in fear, thinking that kind of plot definitely shouldn't have popped up in the original game. Iris added that she was allowed to finish her studies at the academy and live in a dorm, but right after graduating from the school she'd be on her own, trembling all over. Garnet realized Datura had suffered the same fate she should have faced according to the original game's storyline. Noticing North's clearly sad and worried expression, Iris asked if she was okay and said she was worried about what happened that night. The princess blushed slightly again. Feeling the sweet care from the guy who always looked out for her, she said she was fine. The dark-haired guy stepped closer to the heir to the throne. He looked into her bright pink eyes and said nothing, but his gaze said a lot. Garnet suddenly remembered his main problem, that is the almost maxed out relationship levels with his favorites. When Lillian and Nellum started moving, Iris wished her big bro good morning, and the girl looked at each of them thinking about her own crew. North blushed hard, closed her eyes, and waved her hand toward herself, deciding mentally she needed to think about all this solo. The little animal just opened one eye because it knew its lady was safe, and besides, a new and interesting day was about to start. At night, Datura was the only person in the entire female dorm of the Demon Academy. Sitting on the floor in a corner of the room, the dark-haired girl thought everything was over for her, because her own dad kicked her out of the house and stripped her of her title. West hugged her knees, not understanding why all the bad stuff was happening just to her, since she was only trying to protect her storyline. When the girl was reborn as the beautiful character from her favorite game, she was absolutely happy and thrilled looking in the mirror and loving her reflection. She thought that even if she wasn't born as the main character, she could still live differently. According to the original simulator's script, Datura always interfered with the main heroine Rose no matter how the story went. In any storyline branch, West ended up the loser. No matter which path the player chose, Astra publicly refused to commit to her, whether in a past life or this one. Her loved one had to reject her again, leaving the girl alone with that useless feeling. The dark-haired girl was sure that knowing all the game's features, she could change her fate, reach the desired RN ending, and replace the main character. Besides all the endings, the game had a secret RN ending available at max affection levels for the love interest. Then she was sure that even though the game was just starting and it wasn't clear how to pull it off, Datura was confident in her goals. She had to follow the game's rules and make the right calls. Because now there weren't any convenient save load buttons, but still, her loved one had to reject her again, leaving the girl alone with that useless feeling. The dark-haired girl was sure that knowing all the game's features, she could change her fate, reach the desired ending of RN, and replace the main character. Besides all the endings, the game had a secret RN ending unlocked at max affection levels for the love interest. Then she was sure that even though the game just started and it wasn't clear how to do everything to reach her goal, Datura was confident in her objectives. She had to follow the game's rules and make the right decisions. Because now there weren't those convenient save and load buttons, and yet, thanks to her plot knowledge, the girl clearly understood what she had to do first. To have a successful future, she was supposed to play Datura, the ideal smart villainess, the future queen of the West, but no matter how hard she tried, things more or less didn't go right. Because Garnet suddenly showed up in her path, who unlike her game version managed to become the northern heir. She made friends with every possible love interest, and even broke off the engagement because she wanted to take the northern princess as her wife. Wes was desperate to be in her place, but could only watch from the sidelines how amazingly things unfolded. The circumstances for her rival, Datura was ready to do whatever it took to take the spot of this spoiled girl who didn't deserve any of it. Her soul was invaded by a feeling of revenge and a loneliness so deep it covered her whole body. Just thinking about how everyone treated North made her shiver. After a while, Iris was walking through the capital's shops with Garnet, and then decided to take her to the Monster Hunters Guild. Looking around the huge hall with high ceilings and multiple floors inside the space, the blonde smiled excitedly. Iris apologized to the princess for coming here because she needed to talk to her boss, but the girl just seemed happy. The guild boss himself approached them, bowed, put his hand on his chest and greeted the Northern Air Princess. The man winked and said North had been killing it lately, having taken down 2 monsters solo, waving his palms. The blonde girl said she couldn't handle monsters alone and that her friends came to help her. The man ignored that and said it was especially tough fighting lower demons, such horror. And she also ended up in the Academy's territory. Garnet was a bit surprised to get praise from the guild boss and then heard rumors from him that they were planning to make her the future lord's bride. Suddenly Iris hugged the girl and asked the boss not to say nonsense because the king had named her heir and marriage wasn't even mentioned. The man crossed his arms over his chest and agreed Garnet would be a wonderful queen of the north, but reminded her of her 2 brothers who could take her place if needed. Then he remembered the king of the east's daughter, who unlike her father was born a regular demon and could easily take her wife's spot. After a brief chat, the blonde girl accompanied by a young man left the guild, which she really liked, along with the hunters. Iris suddenly declared that North considered herself weak, but even people who don't know her personally think the girl is a really strong demon. The princess blushed, suggesting with a smile that she brought her here to boost her self-esteem, and then thanked her for it. Suddenly remembering her affection stats were almost maxed, Garnet turned blushed and thought she should stop. Iris stayed standing there confused about what caused the heir's behavior. To the northern throne, very embarrassed at the same time. Datura was walking through the forest on a cloudy day, thinking it was all over for her and she wouldn't get the ending she wanted. She grimaced and thought she never expected this kind of plot twist, but now the game definitely needed a full-scale reset. The dark-haired woman knew the only way to get that result, and she went for it. Wes decided on a dumb but desperate move and wanted to wake the final boss, whose fight was the hardest. He'd wake way earlier than in the original game plot, but the girl had nothing left to lose. In this case, Datura used all her magic skills to help, which luckily didn't abandon her, unlike her love interest channeling all her magic into the tombstone, which had long held the final boss's seal and all his dark magical energy. The ground started shaking under her feet and whirlwinds spun in the air while that same demon began to wake up, feeling freed from the seal. He escaped from there and still hadn't regained consciousness, but Datura was sure the whole world would be in trouble once the boss realized he was free, who for a long time kept the final boss's seal and all his dark magical energy. The ground started shaking beneath her feet and whirlwinds swirled in the air while that same demon began to wake up, feeling freed from the seal. He escaped from there and still hadn't regained consciousness. But Datura was sure the whole world would be in trouble once the boss realized he was free. The dark-haired woman stood up and smiled as she watched the whirlwind swirling the demon to wake him up and summon all his power again. At the same time, the new fall semester began at the academy, and all the students returned to their dorms to continue their studies. Garnet couldn't keep calm and act as chill as her classmates because she knew way more than the rest according to the original game plot. The final boss was supposed to show up with a deafening battle at the end of this semester. Now everything had changed so much she couldn't figure out what or where to expect, even though the princess's life depended on this visit. According to the simulator's rules, the boss could only be beaten by the main character whose stats were close to 200, and also had a connection with one of the favorites. Leaning over her desk with a silent groan, Garnet thought that despite everything she'd done, she was getting closer and closer to a bad ending. Meanwhile, the teacher had already covered the whole board with formulas while reading the reference material, but that didn't bother the princess. The blonde closed her eyes, thinking sadly that she still hadn't come up with a way to help Rose. Sitting next to Iris, Garnet leaned back and looked up at the ceiling, wondering what she should do now with everything going down. The girl noticed that the weather, which had been sunny before, suddenly turned bad, the sky filled with black clouds. Then a roar was heard. Students started grabbing their desks, panicking and screaming in disbelief, while the ground beneath them shook and the window panes vibrated, also desperately clutching the tree with her fingers. North thought in fear that such an earthquake had never happened in the game. Iris and Nellum immediately jumped from their seats, trying to protect their mistress from the possible destruction this could bring. Only Datura, also sitting in the office with everyone else, was completely calm. She didn't move an inch and even smirked at the corner of her lips. The teacher ran to the main door and ordered everyone to get out as fast as possible to evacuate to the street. Lots of students rushed in a non-stop fast stream toward the narrow doors. Trying to escape potential harm, Astra immediately took charge and told the guys to calm down. In today's recap manhwa, she then added that those who stayed in the office would leave through the window. She turned the right way and waved her hand, channeling her plant's energy, and immediately a loud crash was heard in the room. A huge bright green stem appeared out of nowhere, descending from the second floor to the ground so people could safely climb down. Astra's friends watched in awe at the work she'd done so. They gathered in a tight circle around the plant, worried about her friend and the unknown. The blonde turned and called Rose, and she, trembling, nodded and followed her. Both girls climbed down to the street along the huge stem, holding their dresses with their palms and silently screaming at the sharp turns of the movement. The students had already evacuated en masse from the academy building and were running down the street, packed in small groups, panicking at the next tremors. Garnet looked at the teachers, who were apparently discussing everything going on, and assumed all the students had managed to get out of the building. The blonde teacher, checking the lists, suddenly shouted loudly that some students were still missing. Rose suddenly turned the other way, and while walking yelled to her friend that she'd bring those students, starting to run determinedly forward. Trying to stop her, Garnet shouted it was dangerous and she shouldn't do it, fear shining in her bright pink eyes. Only the green-eyed one who ran off ignored the princess's words and her outstretched hand. Instead, she ran ahead without a care, Neelam and Iris turned at the noise but saw Garnet already running after her brave friend, who didn't think about her own safety. Kiria and Astray joined the young girls, frowning at the two fragile girls who'd taken on the role of saving others. North still managed to catch up to the main character and called her by name. Only then did Rose pause and turn around. Surprise on her face, the blonde woman grabbed her shoulders and said that was pure madness. Because she wasn't supposed to go there alone, and even though she was worried about the others, Rose didn't realize all the possible danger. She smiled at all the worry and said there was no need to stress so much about her. Then she immediately turned around and pointed to two unknown girls sitting in a corner curled up against the wall, shaking with fear. Calming each other down, Garnet approached them and leaned in a bit, asking how they were feeling. Then added that it was dangerous to be here now and that it was time to get out. But her companions didn't answer, and the heir to the throne stepped back a little, looking at them and mentally noting that both had gone pale with horror. The brown-haired girl was trembling and couldn't even speak, and her friend looked up and with a hoarse voice told Lady Garnet that they had seen it clearing her throat. She explained that the girls were having lunch in the school's backyard when they saw the terrifying figure of that same demon. The student added that the look in its black and yellow eyes was so scary that they immediately ran away to escape, helping her friend up. The dark-haired girl said just the memory made her legs shake, but that it was really time for them to get out of there. Garnet turned around and confidently said that she and Rose needed to get the girls out of the building and then tell the teachers everything. They barely had time to move when another crushing bang and a roar of something falling nearby echoed in the room. Rose couldn't keep her balance or stand, so she fell face first, stretching out her palms and planting them on the ground. The blonde turned around and ordered the girls to run to the central plaza where the teachers and other students should be, and they'd catch up with them later. She crouched down and helped her friend up, squeezing her palms and fighting her own fear, reminding her they had to hurry. Garnet sniffed the air, but felt like there was no more oxygen in her lungs. She stopped and swallowed calmly. The concentration of magic in the heavy air had become absolutely massive, and there weren't many ways to explain such an atmosphere. Rose felt the same, then looked ahead with her bright green eyes and stammered the name of her friend Garnet. She felt sweat drip from her forehead out of fear, but turned and looked in the same direction as her friend's gaze. Right in front of them stood the final boss of the game, who could instill fear and horror in everyone around just by being there. North's pink eyes shone with terror, and she soon realized that a quick and tragic death might be way closer than she ever imagined. The demon with huge black and red wings and white horns smiled, and he didn't look angry or worried at all, violently trembling all over. The blonde girl looked at him and still couldn't understand how this was possible. The original game's final boss was called Kurama. He was the ex-emperor of an empire who desired unlimited power, so he got lost and turned into a tyrant. The current emperor managed to defeat and seal him, but in the story the seal broke, bringing him back to the world. But that happened later. Garnet thought with horror that at this rate and with incomprehensible leaps, events could lead her to the death she feared. Kurama's strong hand gripped her fragile throat, squeezing it so air completely stopped flowing into her lungs while the demon lifted her off the ground. Still squeezing her neck with his long fingers, the heir to the throne started coughing. Rose was still nearby and, panicking, called her friend's name, but could only hoarsely tell her to get out of here fast. Kicking her legs in the air while the lack of oxygen burned her lungs, the blonde panicked and thought about buying time for her to escape. Garnet's bright pink eyes filled with crystal-clear tears as she thought about the fact that she wasn't going to die. Swinging hard and using all her physical strength to help North break free from her boss's tenacious grip and kicked him hard, staggering back from her own hit, the girl suddenly felt joy at being able to defend herself against such a strong character. Stepping back from her own hit, the girl suddenly felt hyped to defend herself against such a strong character. It was like watching in slow-mo how the hand of this scary grey villain moved further away from her neck. Kurama flew into the stone wall with all his might and crashed into it, making the whole room fill with dust and sharp fragments. Garnet immediately dropped to the floor, clutching her neck and coughing again. Closing her eyes and catching her breath, Rose grabbed her friend's hand and yelled they had to bounce ASAP. To warn the teachers about this sketchy demon, North nodded, and both booked it forward because it was urgent. They needed to get everyone off the academy grounds since even the teachers couldn't handle Kurama. The girls suddenly felt the shadows around them thicken and the air get heavier, definitely not a good vibe. The final boss, who appeared behind them, just looked amused by the students' antics. He called these ladies slow, and Rose and Garnet quickly split up. When the demon's magic hit between them, trying to attack with fresh energy, Kurama said this was a pretty interesting attempt. But it was definitely not enough to take down the ruler of the underworld, as he reached out to the trembling girls who clung to each other in horror. With a predator's grin, the demon asked how the emperor was doing, someone he hadn't seen in ages. Kurama was one of the empire's first rulers, but a rival sealed him in that stone long ago, and centuries had passed. The final boss they were after had died ages ago, and the current ruler was the demon lord, Astra's dad, who took the heir spot in the original story. When Kurama found out his sworn enemy was dead, he swore to wipe the entire empire off the map, building a new kingdom from its ashes. Garnet knew she had to stop him somehow, but also realized the side hero couldn't beat the final boss. Mentally apologizing to the current demon king, the blonde thought she could just bring Kurama along like he was the emperor. Suddenly, Iris and Lillian appeared in the hallway, taking turns calling out to Garnet since they'd gone after the girl without waiting for her to come back now, their only hope for salvation. The blonde girl screamed with joy and even smiled. Rose turned to them and quickly explained that this demon introduced himself as Kurama, one of the empire's first lords. Lillian stroked her chin, wondering if this same evil demon had been sealed over 300 years ago. Iris lit a bright flame in her palm, casually saying she didn't care who was in front of her, Kurama or some mountain radish. The dark-haired guy added with a grin that attacking helpless girls was the lowest move possible, watching the young man's bold behavior with interest. Kurama smiled at his thoughts and muttered that this dude was pretty curious. Nelam ran to the girls and heard the demon say that before the Emperor's visit he agreed to have some fun with all of them. When Garnet tried to say something, the blonde put a finger to his lips and shook his head, telling her to stay quiet. After hugging his lover from behind, the young man pointed the girls toward a distant corridor so they could go there and avoid getting hurt during the fight. Iris and Lillian waited for this moment and attacked the demon together, calling on infernal flames of various types. Kurama stepped back a bit, but the fire didn't seem to hurt him, as the final boss appeared to absorb everything aimed at him. After extinguishing the flames, he said everything went pretty well, and that he might even take them into his service after ascending the throne. Iris got even angrier, and lunged at the enemy, faster, growling and yelling that he shouldn't even dream of that outcome. Astra and Kirilla ran toward the noise and found two siblings already fighting an unknown creature, attacking it from different sides. The redhead froze, eyes wide and jaw dropped when he recognized the famous Kurama as the enemy of his friends. Garnet quickly approached and said the heir to the throne had understood everything correctly and that it was indeed the same ancient ruler. Both guys stood up and frowned when the blonde said if they didn't stop him and do something, his empire would fall. Tired from the attacks of the arrogant young ones, the demon stretched out his hand forward and forced the stone beneath him to shatter into many pieces. Channeling all his power downward, the final boss made the ground collapse right at the feet of the speedy teens who dared to resist. Lillian and Iris flew back, both stunned by Kurama's heavy, deafening energy, who as expected did not back down. Turning toward Garnet, the blonde guy realized he had to step up, and gently told the girl to stay back and not join this fight. The young man immediately rushed to help the prince of the southern lands, who was already gearing up for another attack on the enemy. Asta explained that Kurama was an ancient lord of the underworld, a powerful demon who used forbidden techniques. This tyrant was feared not only by his enemies, but also by his allies. He put power above everything in the world, and as a result brought pain to those around him. Trembling all over, Rose said it was seriously creepy and then quietly asked if he was really connected to her family. Astra immediately disagreed and said they weren't related because Kurama was overthrown by the old demon lord. Garnet thought to confess she only knew the main game plot, but understood that without the main character's powers, there was no way to beat him. Iris, who approached them, suddenly punched her palm and declared it was the first time she fought someone that strong, and that's why it was sick at the same time. Kurama easily shrugged off Nelam and Kiria's serious attacks. The final boss suddenly stared closely at Astra and declared the dude radiated a power only royal bloodlines had. Immediately looking away, the demon sighed, bored, and said this guy still wasn't the one he was looking for. The redhead replied that, of course, that wasn't true because he'd been locked up for hundreds of years when his biggest enemy sealed him in the name of his descendants. The young man added that the ruler's disappearance was explained by the fact that he spent all his energy on that imprisonment, so he vanished. Kurama's yellow pupils and black eyes seemed to burn with hate, but were also full of surprise because he definitely didn't expect this. Waving his hands angrily, the demon wondered what to do now because all those years in captivity, he only dreamed of revenge. Garnet recalled that in the original storyline, Kurama found out the truth and got furious, then decided to destroy the whole kingdom. The blonde girl panicked and thought about how they could stop the final boss, because Rose wasn't fully ready to fight him yet. Suddenly Pai appeared, snapping the girl out of her thoughts, and shouted he felt negative energy coming from here. Rose and Garnet looked surprised at the little animal, who fearlessly ran to help. Sensing trouble, Pai saw Kurama in front of him holding his head with his hands, still unsure what to do now. Suddenly he yelled he made sure to seal him tight, and immediately wondered why he woke up now. The blonde girl asked, surprised, if he really knew, Kurama instantly merging the animal's words in her head and clarifying what sealed meant. Pai said that centuries ago a demon was sealed at the academy. In today's recap manhwa, but even that strong seal definitely started to weaken over time. He added he came here because he felt the familiar negative magic since he was the one who sealed Kurama back then. Garnet's bright pink eyes popped wide open, almost falling out of her head when she heard those words from her little animal. At the same time, the demon stopped his rant, because he felt with every fiber of his soul the very familiar energy of light. He looked at the strange little magical creature, but murmured he knew this glow very well. Looking at the lemon-yellow body of the winged kitten and some parts of its white fur, Kurama said he'd never forget the energy that defeated him. Switching back to a loud, guttural roar, the final boss growled, asking if he was the demon lord called Pirakasa. Garnet thought that, judging by Astra's words, the old lord gave all his strength to seal Kurama, and then she completely vanished without a trace. The blonde girl was shocked, thinking they had been friends. All this time feeding a historical figure who should have been dead ages ago. The beast claimed it was only because he sealed Kurama and used up all his strength on him that he lost and still couldn't get back his human form. Lifting several huge rocks with his strength, the demon shouted that his opponent hadn't changed at all and dared to ignore him. As he threw massive rocks in a fast wild flight, the dark-haired guy said this behavior really pissed him off. Some of the stone fragments barely touched and would have seriously hurt Garnet, who, even if she wanted to, wouldn't have had time to dodge the crash. Pirakasa immediately leaned forward and shouted loudly that he'd protect Lady Garnet. Then he raised his paws. The little animal started stretching, glowing, and changing form, first taking the shape of a small kid in a white robe, then appearing to everyone as a young guy with long blonde hair, huge white wings, and an angelic robe. Astrid, Rose, and Garnet watched in surprise and awe at how easily he transformed into a human, and stopped the spell, staring at his palms with light green eyes in surprise, turning them in different directions. Pirakasa said that because the seal broke, his power returned to him. Iris and Lillian nearby still couldn't wrap their heads around how a small, cute animal could turn into a great warrior, Kurama said with a threatening tone. That he'd been waiting centuries to finally get revenge from that battle, and this time he wouldn't lose. Despite everything going down, the blonde warrior looked calm and even chill. While listening to his old enemy's threats, the dark mage gathered all his power into a huge energy ball, channeling all the rage he'd built up over many years into it, and blasting another chunk of massive sharp rocks. Kurama shouted that this time he'd definitely finish him off. Pirakasa, barely spreading his wings, was still battle-ready and wasn't about to back down. After being hit by simple but super sharp rocks many centuries ago, sitting on a stone floor, the dark guy declared that thanks to his research he'd created a new generation of demons, saying he'd become their leader, the strongest living demons who'd have to recognize. The new ruler of the underworld. When the pentagram was fully complete, Kurama raised his hand, and the huge drawing on the ground glowed white. Suddenly, a bunch of black energy burst out from beneath the earth, tangled in garnet red lightning. The young guy turned his head surprised as a dark spirit rose above the young researcher, and ominously declared he was the true god of this world. The young demon screamed in pain and struggled for air when an unknown nightmare spirit entered his body without asking at all. That's how Kurama appeared in the world known as the cruelest ruler, for whom nothing was more important than power. The dark spirit that settled in his soul murmured with interest that no one respected this demon, and his eyes turned black. Then destroyed the emperor's throne room, causing huge stone blocks to fall straight from the high ceiling. The wild spirit declared that if they didn't want to respect the demon, he'd gladly show them how to fear him. During his crushing attack, he injured several people who couldn't fight off the numerous stones flying at them. The crushed man was pinned to the ground, gasping in shock. Unable to understand how this weak kid suddenly took over such massive power, Kurama laughed and shouted he'd show these servants their place, give orders, and they'd just have to obey. At the same time, his close friend was behind a distant column, watching and hearing everything, realizing the full weight of the possible future. Peeking from behind the column, Pirakasa whispered that his friend had done something terrible, looking at him with eyes shining with excitement. Kurama created a real hell for all the empire's inhabitants. He showed no mercy. And he didn't even care about how they begged for mercy when his subjects screamed it wasn't him. The dude just laughed and said he was the one and only king now. Demon who'd rule them all, the dark-haired guy immediately spread his arms wide and with a bright smile declared that from now on, no one could ever top him again. People prayed once more, but now they weren't looking at Kurama. They were begging Pirakasa. Clutching their clothes and crying, saying only he could stop the evil, the young man turned to the unlucky citizens of the kingdom who begged him to become the new ruler and declared they were down to follow him anywhere. The evil spirit inside the emperor seemed totally chill, while chaos and total destruction went down all around him and people suffered. Looking around at everything made by his own hands, the dark-haired man muttered it was just a straight-up amazing sight, and that no one would ever doubt his strength again. Pirakasa stepped up quick, spread his shining white wings, and said low-key, but with confidence and firmness, that it was all over for him now. The blonde dude said he betrayed his people, who independently asked to overthrow the emperor from the throne, and added that he himself would be the next ruler. Turning around and staring at his old friend with yellow eyes burning with hate, Kurama wondered if even he doubted him, channeling all his energy at him and echoing the words that he'd become the new lord of the underworld. The dark-haired guy begged him not to laugh. Pirakasa skillfully and fast used the ancient spellbook knowledge needed to take down the possessed ruler, his face grim and almost deathly pale, along with the pentagram drawn in the air covered in weird patterns, forcefully directing a huge white magic pattern at Kurama. To seal him in stone in the future, the dark-haired guy wasn't about to give up without a fight. With even more rage, he attacked his old friend to defend himself. Pirakasa said that because of his greed, the ruler was hit by the curse of the ancient demon lord, and could only ease his suffering and unbearable pain by directing his light magic at his old friend. The young man said that as his friend and new demon king, he'd seal his opponent right there. The emperor growled and squeezed his eyes shut against the bright blinding light, while almost completely surrounded by Pirakasa's shining magic. In the end, one ancient magic lost to another, and the dark demon was dragged straight underground, sealing his magical power in stone. When it was all over, the blonde dropped to his knees in front of the tombstone and gasped. Thinking he'd drained all his strength and stamina, the young man grabbed the white shirt on his chest with his fingers, because he couldn't get enough air, and realized at this rate he could die using the last magic he had left. Pirakasa reincarnated into a small magical creature that helped him stay alive, curled up on the cold ground. The hero of this battle thought he'd have to stay in this body for a while to survive this moment. Now the situation was different. He just had allies willing to help. In such a tough fight, staring at his sworn enemy, the blonde whispered with regret that he hadn't changed at all. over all these centuries, and so he'd fall back into oblivion again. Kurama shook his head, declaring he remembered everything they did to him, and so he'd make them suffer as much as he had all these years. Garnet was shocked, feeling and realizing that Laura from the final boss had changed dramatically. Like everyone in the air could feel it, the girl had a clear impression someone possessed and controlled the dark demon. And he himself was not happy about it at all, not wanting to distract Pirakasa from the incoming attack. The blonde hesitated, leaned forward, and quietly asked if anyone else thought. Kurama's face completely stopped, looking normal and human as he breathed heavily and declared he'd definitely get revenge on everyone responsible. It seemed even the body of such a strong ruler couldn't handle the massive amount of dark magic inside him anymore. The ancient evil spirit that captured the body of what was once a young, strong guy just enjoyed and smiled at how things were unfolding. Kurama's lips, they didn't even seem to move as he ordered everyone present to submit immediately to him and his will. Iris. Suddenly he said that a monster hunter's instinct tells him they have to take down the entity that's taken over this old man's brain. Pulling his brother away from Garnet, Lillian said that for the first time, she saw the possibility of a ruling figure being attacked and possessed by an outside force. The blonde dude was totally zoned out from what was going down, and said that if he managed to catch Kurama he could run some pretty sick experiments. Pirakasa said that a long time ago, there were 2 tomes in the underworld that no one was supposed to study, but they broke the rules. Garnet nervously listened to the fact that the white tome was about how to strip a demon of magic, but the black one contained a collection of forbidden magical techniques. The blonde man crossed his arms over his chest and said he didn't exactly know how this knowledge affected Kurama, but that's what made him what he is. When North asked why the emperor needed these writings, Piraka explained he started ruling at a young age but wasn't strong and feared he'd be overthrown someday. The girl thought she knew that feeling firsthand. Then she asked how the demon had to pay for it. The green-eyed man exhaled and said that magic that strong affects each person differently. He added that because of studying the white tome, he eventually lost his human form. But he didn't know the details about Kurama. The spirit still controlled someone else's body and ordered him to kill immediately anyone who didn't acknowledge him, and he could only obey, extending his hand forward and protecting everyone from another attack. Astra declared that as the future demon ruler he was obligated to stop these atrocities. Lillian raised her whip, declaring that His Majesty wasn't alone. Inelem said they had to team up to take this down. Ignoring Garnet's silent objections, Iris lit a flame in his palm and declared that since this fight had started, he was joining in too. Kiria asked for water, suggesting that the Northerners entering battle with fire and wind forces could destroy everything here, so they needed to cover them. Suddenly Rose declared with determination that she'd help all the guys too, but the blonde rushed forward and told the girl to wait. Unable to stop her friend, the heir to the throne closed her eyes and exhaled, thinking that in that case she had to go with them too. All the fighters shouted at once and rushed to attack Kurama from different sides, with no intention of cutting him any slack, attacking with their powers. Meanwhile, the demon tried to defend against every hit. Garnet quietly approached him from behind, calling his name. The blonde asked if he was really satisfied with everything, pointing out that the man was under someone's control for power's sake, because that made no sense. Kurama turned to the princess and growled that a girl like her would never understand him or all this. North claimed she was born into a royal family and surrounded by high society demons in a place where only magical skills mattered. She was born without them, and added that because of that she spent her whole life trying to earn respect from all the other demons who were even better. The blonde said hesitantly that there are other ways to get strong, like killing small agile magic slimes. She immediately decided it was time to bail and get away. Garnet invited him to think it over and stepped aside away from Kurama, who suddenly remembered how he was despised and never thought to show respect, constantly pointing out the ruler's weaknesses. When the girl hid behind Pirakas, the demon quietly asked if she hated those who didn't love her, and if by getting so strong she wanted revenge on them. The girl immediately said she didn't hate them at all, and just wanted to live a chill life with those she loved a lot. Kurama stopped abruptly, confusion shining in his eyes as he repeated the words he'd heard from her about an ordinary life. The evil spirit didn't like the doubt stirring in the soul of this demon under its full control at all. It growled and reminded Kurama that some girl couldn't mess with its plans and that they were way too... In today's recap, Manhwa, distracted by little things like that and let their guard down, the black-haired guy lowered his head and created a glowing pentagram in the air, hoping to take down everyone standing against him. Kurama froze when he realized he couldn't move at all, no matter how much he twisted or tried to lift his arms, or even move his fingers. The girl behind the warrior explained with a bright smile that this was happening to him because she cast her paralyzing magic on him. Garnet added that before she could only use that energy through touch, but now her power had leveled up massively. Iris looked at the demon, mumbling that she even felt bad for this dude because she remembered how the body just wouldn't obey during paralysis magic. Breathing heavily, Kurama couldn't move, just growled pissed off, then blew out black-blue smoke, choking on his own fingers. Kirilla and Astra stared shocked as some weird substance spread fast in the air, forming a dome. Pirakasa immediately ordered loud and strict that no one present should breathe in that smoke because this magic could enslave their minds. The young ones who accidentally inhaled the dark magic sat on the floor trying to clear their throats and hold their breath at the same time. Garnet spun around in the black-blue smoke, shaking her head in panic, trying to spot Rose, who wasn't beside the guys. The blonde saw her friend behind the demon clearly about to pull off something bold and honestly super dumb. Right then, with the power of light, She had green-eyed and fierce. She smacked Kurama in the back to stop him from poisoning the air with that nasty magical smoke. The dark-haired man shouted loudly that he was blinded by the bright magical light rose scent covering his eyes with his hand and black sleeve. Garnet clenched her fists hard, thinking this was her one shot, so she gathered herself and rushed forward fast. The princess yelled that the moment was finally open to attack and pushed off the crumbling stone floor leaping. Kurama, who just opened his eyes, looked shocked at the militant girl already on top of him, ready to strike. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed, and everything around them got covered in a thick cloud of dust thrown into the air with stones breaking into tiny pieces. Garnet's hit didn't land like she planned because some weird substance suddenly grabbed Kurama's leg, protecting him at the last second. The blonde froze, surprised and scared, staring at the strange creature, trying to figure out what the hell was holding her up in the air. Who was already on top, ready to attack him. Suddenly, a deafening roar was heard, and everything around got covered by a thick layer of dust thrown into the air, and the stones shattered into tiny pieces. Garnet's hit didn't land as expected, because some weird substance suddenly grabbed Kurama by the leg, saving him at the last second. The blonde froze in shock and fear, staring at the unexplainable creature and trying to figure out what the hell was holding her up. Smiling, the demon casually said that even though she was super strong physically, there wasn't a single scent of magic in her moves or aura. In today's recap manhwa, the unclear substance abruptly threw the girl onto the broken ground, declaring with disgust that never before